Traitor! Silas Reed snarled, shoving a crumpled sheet of music into Chenoa's trembling hands as firelight flickered in the cramped backstage. Chenoa, clutching her grandmother Halona's shawl, felt her heart race when Reed shoved Halona, sending her sprawling in pain. In a surge of rage, Chenoa hurled a prop at Reed, grazing his shoulder only to hear his roar for the sheriff. Now a fugitive accused of assault, she faced a gut-wrenching choice: sing Reed's twisted songs to save Halona or flee to protect her Cheyenne heritage. Chenoa, a 25-year-old Cheyenne singer in 1917 Wyoming, carried a voice rich with her people's spirit, but heavy with sorrow. Trapped in a white theater troupe that mocked her sacred songs, she earned money for her grandmother Halona's arthritis medicine, while enduring taunts as an exotic act. Shunned by her tribe for selling out and torn by her forbidden love for Daniel, a white musician, Chenoa stood at a crossroads, her heart split between duty to family and the call to defend her culture. Chenoa sat alone in the dim backstage, her fingers tracing the worn strings of her grandmother's old guitar. The air smelled of dust and grease paint, and the faint hum of the waiting crowd seeped through the curtain. She hummed a Cheyenne folk song, its melody a fragile thread to her ancestors, grounding her against the chaos of the theater. Her eyes fell on a small photograph tucked in her pocket. Halona's wrinkled smile staring back, reminding her of the medicine bills piling up. She whispered to herself, "Sing for her," as if the words could steel her heart. A stagehand barked for her to hurry, his voice sharp, slicing through her thoughts. Chenoa stood, smoothing her dress, but the weight of singing for a white audience, who saw her as a curiosity, pressed down on her chest. She glanced at the mirror, seeing not a singer but a woman caught between worlds, her dark eyes heavy with unspoken grief. Silas Reed stormed in, his boots thudding on the wooden floor, a crumpled sheet of music clutched in his fist. "You'll sing this tonight," he growled, tossing it at Chenoa's feet. The paper bore lyrics that twisted Cheyenne life into a savage caricature, words that stung like a slap. Chenoa's stomach churned as she read, her fingers tightening around the guitar. Reed smirked, his eyes glinting with greed, boasting how the Wild Indian Act packed the house. She shook her head, voice low but firm. "This insults my people," Reed laughed, a harsh bark, calling her a fool who'd starve without him. He leaned closer, his breath sour, warning her to obey or lose everything. Chenoa's heart pounded, torn between Halona's needs and the sacred songs she swore to protect, her resolve wavering under his glare. Halona shuffled in, her frail frame bent, carrying a tin cup of tea for Chenoa. Reed sneered, "What's this useless old hag doing here?" His words cut deep, and Chenoa sprang up, shielding her grandmother, her voice trembling with fury. Halona's eyes, clouded with pain, met Chenoa's, silently urging calm despite the insult. Reed mocked again, saying Halona was a burden dragging Chenoa down. Chenoa's hand shook, her love for Halona clashing with the rage boiling inside. Halona touched her arm, her voice soft. "Don't let him break you." Reed turned away, chuckling, but the air crackled with tension. Chenoa helped Halona sit, her heart aching as she felt the fragility of her grandmother's bones, knowing every song she sang was for her survival. Chenoa picked up Reed's music, her fingers cold against the paper. "I won't sing this," she said, voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. She spoke of the Cheyenne songs, their stories woven into her blood, not for mockery. Reed's face twisted, calling her a stubborn squaw who'd learn her place. Chenoa stood taller, thinking of her ancestors' strength, refusing to let Reed defile their legacy. He scoffed, saying her pride wouldn't pay for Halona's medicine. Chenoa's mind raced, picturing Halona's pain without treatment. Yet the thought of betraying her culture made her sick. She met Reed's eyes, defiance burning, but doubt crept in, whispering she might have no choice. Reed stormed out, leaving her alone with the weight of her words. Reed returned, his face red with anger, pointing a thick finger at Chenoa. "You're done if you don't sing," he spat, threatening to fire her on the spot. He bragged about his ties to Sheriff Norton, saying one word from him could land her in jail. Chenoa's throat tightened, imagining Halona alone, unable to afford medicine. Reed's voice dropped, cruel and low, suggesting she beg for her job. She clenched her fists, humiliation burning her cheeks, but the image of Halona's frail hands kept her silent. He leaned in, his shadow looming, promising to make her life hell if she defied him. Chenoa's knees trembled, but she held her ground, her heart screaming to protect her grandmother while her mind feared the consequences. Reed sneered, turning away, leaving her in a storm of dread. Daniel slipped into the backstage, his violin case slung over his shoulder, catching the tail end of Reed's threats. "He can't talk to you like that," he said, his voice quiet but firm, eyes flashing with anger. Reed whirled, mocking Daniel as a fool chasing an Indian girl. Daniel stepped closer, defending Chenoa's talent, his hands clenched tight. Reed laughed, shoving Daniel aside, but his arm caught Halona, sending her crashing to the floor with a cry. Chenoa gasped, rushing to her grandmother, her heart lurching at Halona's pained grimace. Daniel knelt beside them, whispering apologies, his face pale with guilt. Halona gripped Chenoa's hand, her voice weak, urging her not to fight now. The room spun as Chenoa held her grandmother, torn between fear for Halona and fury at Reed's cruelty. Chenoa's vision blurred with tears as Halona winced, her arthritis flaring from the fall. "How dare you!" she screamed at Reed, her voice raw, echoing in the tight space. Without thinking, she grabbed a wooden prop and hurled it, the stick grazing Reed's shoulder. He stumbled, clutching the spot, his face contorting in rage. "You savage!" he bellowed, swearing to have her arrested. Chenoa froze, the weight of her action crashing down, her breath shallow. Daniel grabbed her arm, urging her to stop, his voice urgent but soft. Halona, struggling to sit, whispered, "Be strong, my girl," her words a lifeline amid the chaos. Reed staggered out, shouting for help, leaving Chenoa's world teetering on the edge of ruin. Reed's cries brought stagehands running, their eyes wide as he pointed at Chenoa, accusing her of assaulting a white man. "She's a danger!" he yelled, demanding the sheriff be called. The room buzzed with whispers, and Chenoa felt every stare like a blade, her status as an outsider stark. She knelt by Halona, stroking her grandmother's hair, whispering apologies for dragging her into this. Daniel hovered nearby, promising to find a way out, but his voice shook with uncertainty. A stagehand returned, saying the sheriff was on his way, and Chenoa's stomach dropped, knowing a Cheyenne woman's word meant nothing against Reed's. She looked at Halona's pale face, her heart breaking at the thought of failing her. The flickering lantern cast shadows, mirroring the fear swallowing her whole. Chenoa sat Halona against a crate, her hands trembling as she adjusted the shawl around her grandmother's shoulders. The backstage felt smaller, the walls closing in as she weighed her choices. Singing Reed's songs could buy Halona's medicine, but each note would betray her people's soul. Fleeing might save her heritage, but leaving Halona behind was unthinkable. She thought of her tribe's songs, their rhythms pulsing in her blood, now at risk of being twisted forever. Halona's eyes met hers, soft but firm, urging her to choose with courage. Chenoa's chest ached, torn between love and duty, her mind racing for a path that wouldn't break her. She whispered a prayer to her ancestors, begging for strength to face the impossible. Daniel knelt beside Chenoa, his hands fidgeting with his violin bow, his face etched with worry. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. He admitted hating the troupe's lies, how they mocked Chenoa's songs for profit. Chenoa's eyes softened, grateful for his kindness, but fear for Halona choked her words. She confessed her dread of losing her grandmother, her voice cracking. Daniel shared his dream of honest music, his words weaving a fragile bond between them. He promised to stand by her, even if it cost his job, his eyes locked on hers. Chenoa felt a spark of hope, but the sheriff's approaching footsteps echoed, pulling her back to the looming threat. Halona's trembling hand clasped Chenoa's, her eyes soft despite the pain carving lines into her face. In the flickering backstage light, she murmured tales of Cheyenne ancestors, their songs a shield against hardship. Chenoa's heart ached, each story a call to protect her heritage, her tears falling silently. Halona's voice, frail but fierce, declared she'd rather die than see Chenoa betray their people. She stroked Chenoa's cheek, her touch a quiet strength, urging her to rise above Reed's cruelty. Chenoa whispered a vow to fight, her voice thick with love, kissing Halona's weathered hand. The air felt heavy, but Halona's faint smile lit a spark of hope in Chenoa's chest. She held her grandmother close, drawing courage from her unwavering spirit. Chenoa stood in the empty backstage, the echo of the crowd fading, her resolve shaken by Halona's pain. Singing Reed's lies could save her grandmother, but the thought twisted her stomach. She trudged to Reed's office, each step heavy with shame, and knocked softly. "I'll do it," she said, her voice barely audible, as Reed's grin spread like poison. He thrust a new script at her, its words mocking her people, and ordered a garish costume. Chenoa's fingers clenched the paper, picturing Halona's frail form, her heart screaming in protest. She nodded, eyes down, the weight of her choice crushing her spirit. Leaving the office, she felt like a traitor, but love for Halona drove her forward. The stage lights burned Chenoa's skin as she stood in a feathered costume, a grotesque parody of her heritage. Her voice wavered, singing Reed's song, each note a stab to her soul, the words choking her. The white crowd clapped, their cheers empty, blind to her humiliation. She caught Daniel's gaze in the wings, his frown a silent apology anchoring her. A spectator yelled, "Dance, Indian!" and laughter followed, searing her cheeks. Chenoa's legs shook as she finished, fleeing to the backstage shadows, her breath ragged. She sank to the floor, clutching Halona's shawl, sobbing for the ancestors she'd shamed. The spotlight's glow lingered in her mind, a cruel reminder of her betrayal. Chenoa lingered in the dark as the audience left, their chatter fading, but a group of Cheyenne elders stayed, their eyes cold. "You've sold us out," one hissed, his voice sharp, slicing Chenoa's heart. She stammered, explaining it was for Halona's medicine, but an elder woman turned away, her silence deafening. A boy watched, his face curious, but offered no comfort. Chenoa's chest tightened, the rejection a deeper wound than Reed's taunts. She dropped to her knees, her hands covering her face, feeling utterly alone. The elders' footsteps echoed as they left, and Chenoa whispered to the air, begging her tribe to forgive her. Her soul yearned for their trust, now a distant hope. T pushed through the backstage curtain, his face bruised, his eyes fierce despite his limp. "They're after you," he said, crouching beside Chenoa, his voice urgent with concern. And he urged her to defy Reed, reminding her of their people's unyielding spirit. T promised to find other Cheyenne singers, his loyalty a lifeline in her despair. Chenoa's lips quivered, gratitude warming her as she hugged him, his strength easing her pain. He spoke of their childhood, singing by the fire, rekindling her fire. They planned a secret meeting by the river at dawn, away from prying eyes. C stood, his hand on her shoulder, vowing to fight beside her, and Chenoa felt a flicker of hope return. Chenoa leaned against a backstage wall, her breath catching as she overheard Reed's voice, low and scheming, with Floyd nearby. "The machine's set," Reed muttered, talking of selling Cheyenne songs to city folk. Floyd laughed, calling it a gold mine from those savages. Chenoa's blood froze, her worst fears confirmed. They were stealing her people's soul. She inched closer, hidden by crates, catching words of recordings and big deals. Her hands shook, scribbling their plan on a scrap of cloth, her heart racing with anger. She slipped away, The truth a heavy burden, knowing she had to act. The theater's shadows seemed to whisper, urging her to protect her heritage. A scrap of paper slid under the backstage door, and Chenoa grabbed it, her pulse quickening at the scrawled words. "Reed's office, midnight, find the recorder." She peered outside. Seeing a figure in a feathered hat melt into the night, her heart naming him the wind singer, the note felt like a gift, but fear of a trap gnawed at her. She tucked it into her sleeve, her mind racing with possibilities, hope battling dread. Chenoa gripped Halona's shawl, whispering a prayer for guidance, her ancestors' voices echoing in her soul. She resolved to follow the clue, her courage rising despite the risk. The moonlight outside seemed to beckon, promising answers in the darkness. Chenoa crept into the theater at midnight, the silence oppressive, her stolen key cold in her hand. Reed's office smelled of stale cigars, papers scattered like fallen leaves. She searched frantically, her heart pounding, until she found a heavy recording machine, its metal cold under her fingers. A file held contracts. Cheyenne singers bound to endless shows, their names written in trembling ink. Chenoa's stomach churned, reading terms that enslaved her people, her anger flaring. She copied pages, her hands smudged, urgency driving her. A creak outside made her duck behind a chair, her breath held, fear sharp as a blade. She escaped, papers hidden, her mission clear but perilous. Chenoa clutched the stolen documents, hiding in the theater's shadows, her mind reeling from Reed's betrayal. The contracts revealed a plan to record Cheyenne songs in secret, selling them to wealthy buyers while chaining singers to brutal tours. A letter from Carter, a city tycoon, promised millions, each word a theft of her people's spirit. Chenoa's tears fell, picturing her tribe's music twisted beyond recognition, her ancestors silenced. She saw Halona's frail face, fearing her grandmother's pride would turn to shame. Her hands shook, tucking the papers into her dress, vowing to stop Reed. The weight of her discovery crushed her, but a fire ignited in her heart, driving her to fight for her people. Chenoa sat in the quiet of her home, the papers hidden under the floorboards, her heart heavy with the truth. She imagined her songs, sacred and pure, sold like trinkets, her chest aching with grief. Halona slept nearby, her breaths uneven, and Chenoa's fear grew, wondering if she could save both her grandmother and her heritage. She traced the contract's words, each one a wound, her resolve hardening. A candle flickered, casting shadows that danced like spirits, urging her to act. Chenoa whispered to her ancestors, begging for strength, her voice trembling but fierce. She stood, ready to confront Reed, her fear swallowed by a burning need for justice. The night held her secrets, but dawn promised a fight. Chenoa stumbled home through the Wyoming night, the stolen papers pressed against her chest, their weight heavier than stone. Her mind churned with Reed's plan to steal Cheyenne's songs, each contract a chain around her people's soul. She sank onto the floor beside Halona's bed, watching her grandmother's shallow breaths, fear clawing at her heart. If Halona knew, would she be ashamed? Chenoa's hands trembled, picturing her tribe's music twisted into mockery across cities. She whispered a prayer, her voice breaking, begging her ancestors for courage. The moonlight cast shadows on the wall, dancing like ghosts of her heritage, urging her to act. She tucked the papers under her mattress, her resolve hardening, but dread kept her awake, haunted by the scale of Reed's betrayal. Chenoa met Daniel at dawn by the river, the water's murmur a faint comfort against her racing thoughts. She showed him the contracts, her voice low, explaining Reed's scheme to sell their songs. Daniel's face paled, his fists clenching as he cursed Reed's greed. Chenoa's eyes burned, confessing her fear of failing Halona and her tribe. He vowed to help, suggesting they find more evidence to expose Reed. They planned to search Reed's office again, their whispers urgent under the rising sun. Daniel touched her hand, his warmth steadying her, but Chenoa's heart ached, knowing the risk could cost them everything. She nodded, gratitude mixing with terror, ready to fight beside him. Daniel sat alone in his room, the stolen papers hidden in his violin case, their words searing his mind. He pictured Chenoa's tear-streaked face, her voice fierce yet fragile, and guilt gnawed at him for staying silent so long. Losing his job could leave his family hungry, but betraying Chenoa felt worse. He strummed a Cheyenne melody on his violin, its notes echoing her pain, strengthening his resolve. He thought of his mother's lessons on fairness, her voice urging him to do right. Daniel packed a small bag, ready to sneak into Reed's office again. He glanced at a photo of his siblings, whispering an apology, choosing Chenoa's cause over his own safety. His heart pounded, but her courage inspired him to act. Tsi limped through the dawn, his ribs aching from Floyd's fists, but his eyes blazed with defiance. Floyd had ambushed him outside a tavern, snarling warnings to stay out of Reed's business. Tse had fought back, earning a black eye before collapsing in the dirt. Now, he found Chenoa by the river, his voice hoarse as he recounted the attack. Chenoa's face crumpled, guilt flooding her for dragging Tse into danger. He waved off her apologies, insisting their people's songs were worth the pain. Tse revealed rumors of other singers trapped by Reed, fueling Chenoa's anger. He gripped her arm, promising to rally their allies, his loyalty a lifeline in her storm of fear. Chenoa slipped into the theater at dusk, her heart hammering as she approached Reed's office. She confronted him, feigning curiosity about his recording machine, her voice steady despite her nerves. Reed's eyes narrowed, dismissing it as a toy, but his tense jaw betrayed his lie. Chenoa pressed, mentioning the contracts, and Reed's face darkened, threatening Halona's safety if she spoke out. Her stomach twisted, picturing her grandmother alone. But she held his gaze, defiance masking her fear. Reed shoved her toward the door, his voice a low growl ordering her to sing or suffer. Chenoa left, her mind racing, knowing she had to act fast to protect Halona and her people. Halona's cough echoed in the small room. Her body curled under a thin blanket, her arthritis flaring worse than ever. Chenoa rushed to her side, panic rising as Halona's face twisted in pain. The doctor, summoned in haste, warned that without expensive medicine soon, Halona might not survive. Chenoa's hands shook, counting her meager coins, far short of the cost. She kissed Halona's forehead, tears falling, promising to find a way. Halona whispered, "Keep singing, my heart," her voice faint but fierce, urging Chenoa not to give up. Chenoa clutched her grandmother's hand, desperation driving her to sing Reed's lies again, her soul screaming against the betrayal. Chenoa dragged herself to the stage, the gaudy costume itching her skin, each feather a mockery of her heritage. Her voice cracked as she sang Reed's song, the words like ash in her mouth, poisoning her spirit. The audience cheered, blind to her pain, their applause a hollow echo. She caught Daniel's gaze in the wings, his nod, a silent anchor, but shame drowned her. A drunk spectator tossed a coin at her feet, laughing, and Chenoa's cheeks burned, humiliation choking her. She fled the stage, collapsing backstage, her sobs muffled in Halona's shawl. She whispered to her ancestors, begging forgiveness, her heart torn between saving Halona and losing herself. Daniel crept into Reed's office at midnight, the theater silent, his pulse racing. He rifled through files, finding letters from Carter detailing plans to mass-produce Cheyenne recordings. His hand shook, copying names of singers, bound by Reed's contracts, their lives stolen. A creak outside made him freeze, but it was only the wind, and he exhaled, sweat beading on his brow. He tucked the papers into his coat, each one a weapon against Reed's greed. Daniel thought of Chenoa's courage, her voice haunting his mind, pushing him to keep searching. He slipped out, heart pounding, determined to hand her the evidence, knowing the risk could change everything. A new note from the wind singer appeared under Chenoa's door, its words scrawled in haste. Federal reporter, Wyoming Hotel, room 12. Chenoa's breath caught, hope flaring as she pictured exposing Reed. She glimpsed the feathered hat outside, the figure vanishing into the fog, a ghost of her people's strength. She memorized the address, her fingers tracing the paper, fear of betrayal lingering. Chenoa hid the note in her shoe, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought of Halona's fading strength, her grandmother's belief fueling her courage. She prayed the wind singer was true, her heart leaping at the chance to fight back, ready to risk it all. Chenoa slipped into the Wyoming Hotel at midnight, her cloak hiding her face as she knocked on room 12. Mr. Harris, a gruff reporter, opened the door, his eyes skeptical but curious. She handed him the recorder and papers, her voice trembling as she explained Reed's theft of Cheyenne songs. Harris scribbled notes, promising to investigate, but warned he needed more proof. Chenoa's heart sank, fearing delays, but his nod gave her hope. She left, checking the shadows for Floyd's men, her nerves frayed. Back home, she sat by Halona, whispering her plan, feeling a spark of triumph despite the looming danger. Daniel's heart pounded as he slipped out of Reed's office, the stolen letters tucked inside his coat. A shadow moved in the theater's dark hallway, and Floyd's hulking figure loomed, his eyes glinting with suspicion. "What are you doing, boy?" Floyd growled, grabbing Daniel's collar, a knife flashing in his hand. Daniel stayed silent, his mind racing to protect Chenoa, even as fear gripped him. Floyd dragged him to a storage room, tying his wrists with coarse rope, snarling that Reed would deal with him. Daniel struggled, the ropes cutting into his skin, but thoughts of Chenoa's courage kept him focused. Floyd slammed the door, leaving Daniel in darkness, his breath ragged, praying Chenoa would stay safe. He vowed to escape, his resolve fueled by her trust in him. Chenoa's stomach dropped when a stagehand whispered that Daniel hadn't been seen since midnight. Her mind flashed to Floyd's cruel smirk, and she knew Reed's thug had him. She crept to the storage room, her hands shaking as she picked the lock with a hairpin. Inside, Daniel sat bound, his face bruised but relieved to see her. Chenoa cut the ropes, her fingers fumbling, guilt flooding her for his pain. "We're in this together," Daniel whispered, his voice steady, easing her fear. They slipped out through a back alley, hearts racing, dodging shadows, knowing Floyd was hunting them. Chenoa clung to Daniel's hand, her gratitude deepening, but dread lingered, pushing her to fight harder. Chenoa stood before the Cheyenne elders at dawn, her voice trembling as she held up Reed's contracts, pleading for their trust. The elders' faces hardened, calling her a sellout who shamed their songs. An old man waved her off, his words sharp, cutting deeper than Reed's insults. Chenoa's eyes burned, explaining she sang for Halona's life, not betrayal, but they turned away. A young girl watched, her gaze curious, offering a flicker of hope. Chenoa's knees weakened, the sting of rejection crushing her spirit, yet she clutched the papers, vowing to prove her loyalty. She left, her heart heavy, feeling like an outcast, but determined to save her people's music. The Cheyenne gathered under a wide sky for a sacred ceremony, and Chenoa took the center, her voice rising in a folk song pure and unbroken. She spoke of Reed's theft, urging unity, her words fierce with conviction. Sheriff Norton stormed in with deputies, their guns drawn, shouting accusations of rioting. Bullets cracked the air, scattering the crowd, and Chenoa's heart lurched as screams filled the night. She grabbed the microphone, defying Norton's orders, exposing Reed's crimes. A deputy shoved through, knocking Halona to the ground, and Chenoa's world tilted, rage and fear colliding. She rushed to her grandmother, her voice a desperate cry swearing to end Reed's reign. The chaos surged, but Chenoa stood firm, her song a beacon of resistance. Halona lay crumpled on the grass, her breath shallow, pain twisting her face as Chenoa knelt beside her. Chenoa's tears fell, her hands cradling Halona's, begging her to hold on. A Cheyenne woman called for a healer, her voice frantic, while Chenoa whispered apologies, guilt choking her for the ceremony's danger. Halona's eyes fluttered, her voice weak, urging Chenoa to keep fighting for their people. The healer arrived, his face grim, saying Halona needed rest she couldn't afford. Chenoa's chest ached, picturing a world without her grandmother, her anchor. She kissed Halona's hand, promising justice, her heart breaking but fueled by love. The crowd's cries faded, leaving Chenoa in a cocoon of grief and resolve. The windsinger appeared at dusk, his feathered hat low, leading Chenoa to a hidden barn outside town. He pointed to a locked chest, whispering of Reed's secret files inside, linking him to Carter and Norton. Chenoa pried it open, her hands trembling, finding letters detailing their plot to exploit Cheyenne singers. She copied pages, her breath quickening, each word a weapon against Reed's greed. The windsinger warned that Reed's men were closing in, his voice urgent. Chenoa stuffed the papers into her bag, her heart racing with hope and fear. She thanked him, his shadowed eyes kind, and slipped away, feeling her ancestors' strength guiding her steps. Chenoa met Agent Miller in a quiet saloon, her cloak hiding the precious documents. She handed over the letters, her voice steady as she detailed Reed's theft and Carter's deals. Miller's eyes narrowed, promising a federal investigation, her pen scratching notes. Chenoa begged for speed, her thoughts on Halona's fading health, her voice cracking. Miller nodded, asking for witnesses to strengthen the case, her tone firm but kind. Chenoa left, her heart lighter, but checked every corner for Floyd's shadow, fear trailing her. She sat by Halona's bed, whispering her progress, a spark of victory warming her despite the danger. The night felt alive, whispering of justice. Carter's men moved like ghosts, their torches lighting the barn as flames devoured Reed's hidden files. Chenoa arrived too late, smoke stinging her eyes, the chest reduced to ash. Her knees buckled, despair crashing over her as years of evidence vanished. She clawed through the rubble, saving a singed letter, her hands blackened, tears streaking her face. A farmer whispered of Carter's hired thugs, confirming her fears of his reach. Chenoa's heart sank, picturing Reed's smug face untouchable. She clutched the letter, her only hope, vowing to rebuild her case. The fire's glow mirrored her rage, pushing her to fight on despite the loss. Chenoa sat by Halona's bed, the singed letter trembling in her hands, her spirit battered. Halona's shallow breaths were a painful reminder of time slipping away, and Chenoa's tears fell, fearing she'd failed. She pictured Reed's victory, her people's songs lost forever, her chest tightening with despair. She whispered to Halona, confessing her doubts, her voice raw with grief. Halona's hand stirred, her touch faint but warm, urging Chenoa to rise. Chenoa thought of her ancestors, their songs echoing in her blood, rekindling her fire. She kissed Halona's forehead, promising to fight, her heart heavy but unbroken. The dawn broke, a faint light of hope piercing her darkness. Daniel found Chenoa at sunrise, his face drawn, the barn's ashes still clinging to his boots. He held her as she wept, his voice soft, admitting he'd nearly given up until her strength inspired him. He showed her a copied contract he'd saved, a small victory against the fire. Daniel urged her to find witnesses, his eyes fierce with belief in her. Chenoa's heart lifted, his faith a balm to her wounds, though Halona's frail form haunted her. They planned to track down other singers, their voices, quiet but determined. Daniel promised to stay by her side, his hand warm in hers, reigniting her courage. Chenoa nodded, ready to face Reed, her spirit bolstered by love and loyalty. Tsi trudged through the morning mist, his bruises still tender, but his spirit unbroken as he reached Chenoa's small home. He sat beside her, his voice steady, sharing rumors of a Cheyenne singer, Mika, who had escaped Carter's grip. Mika knew the truth, about Reed's slave contracts, Tse said, his eyes bright with hope. Chenoa's heart lifted, though guilt for Tse's pain lingered, and she thanked him, her voice soft. He suggested they find Mika in a nearby town, his determination infectious. Tse recalled their childhood, when they'd sung under the stars, rekindling Chenoa's resolve. They agreed to meet Mika at dusk, away from Reed's spies. Tse clasped her hand, his loyalty a beacon, pulling Chenoa from despair as she prepared to fight on. The Windsinger emerged from the shadows at twilight, his feathered hat casting a long silhouette as he faced Chenoa by the river. He revealed himself as Elon, a Cheyenne singer broken by Carter's cruelty, his voice heavy with shame. Elon described signing a contract that stole his freedom, his eyes distant, haunted by lost years. He offered to testify against Carter, handing Chenoa a list of other trapped singers. Chenoa's throat tightened, moved by his courage, and she promised to protect him. Elon warned of Carter's spies, urging her to act fast. She gripped his hand, feeling her ancestors' strength in his resolve, her heart swelling with gratitude. Elon vanished into the night, leaving Chenoa ready to strike. Chenoa gathered Daniel, Tse, and Elan in a hidden barn, the air thick with purpose as they planned their final stand. She proposed exposing Reed at the troupe's biggest show, her voice firm, eyes blazing with determination. Daniel suggested inviting reporters to amplify their truth, his hands steady despite his fear. Tse vowed to rally Cheyenne allies, his face set with defiance. Elan offered to bring Mika and other witnesses, his quiet strength anchoring them. Chenoa outlined a speech to reveal Reed's crimes, her heart pounding with hope and dread. They clasped hands, a circle of courage, knowing this could end Reed or destroy them. Chenoa felt Halona's spirit, urging her forward, ready to risk everything. Chenoa slipped into the Cheyenne camp at dawn, her voice trembling as she begged the elders to join her protest. She showed Elon's list, her words raw, proving Reed's theft of their songs. An elder softened, moved by her passion, and agreed to gather the tribe. Chenoa practiced her folk song, its notes a prayer for strength, her throat tight with emotion. She wrote her speech, each word a vow to honor Halona. Daniel sent word to reporters, his letters urgent, ensuring their story would spread. Tse spread whispers among the Cheyenne, their resolve growing, and Chenoa felt hope flicker, though fear of failure lingered. She donned her true Cheyenne dress, ready to reclaim her voice. Chenoa stepped onto the stage, her heart thundering, the crowd's murmurs fading as she wore her people's true colors, not Reed's mockery. She sang a Cheyenne folk song, its melody pure, silencing the room with its power. Stopping, she spoke, her voice clear, exposing Reed's theft of their music and lives. She held up the contracts, her hands steady, accusing Carter and Norton. The audience gasped, reporters scribbling, as Reed stormed forward, shouting lies. Chenoa stood firm, her eyes fierce, fueled by Halona's love. Tse and the Cheyenne stood in the crowd, their presence a wall of strength. The air crackled, her words igniting a fire of truth. Elon strode onto the stage, his voice steady, as he told of Carter's brutality, his scars hidden, but his pain raw. He introduced Mika, her eyes haunted, who described beatings for refusing Reed's shows. The crowd murmured, shock turning to anger, as Elon shared the list of stolen singers. Chenoa gripped his arm, her heart swelling with pride, their voices a chorus of justice. Reporters leaned forward, their pens racing, capturing every word. Reed yelled, his face red, but the crowd drowned him out, demanding truth. Elon handed a contract to a reporter, his hands steady, sealing Reed's fate. Chenoa felt victory near, her spirits soaring, yet Halona's frail form haunted her. Federal agents burst through the theater doors, their badges glinting as they pushed through the crowd. They seized Reed, his protests lost in the chaos, his wrists bound by cold steel. But Norton tried to flee, his face pale, but Agent Miller blocked him, her voice sharp with authority. The audience roared, their cheers a tide of justice for the Cheyenne. Chenoa embraced Daniel, her tears falling, relief washing over her. Reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, preserving the moment of triumph. Reed cursed, his voice weak as agents dragged him away. Chenoa stood tall, her heart pounding, knowing Halona would be proud, though her absence ached. Miller addressed the crowd, confirming Carter's arrest, the singed letter and Eland's testimony enough to convict him. Reporters shouted questions, their stories set to expose the theft of Cheyenne songs. Chenoa's chest tightened, joy mixing with grief, knowing their music was safe. A young Cheyenne woman thanked her, her voice soft, healing Chenoa's wounds. She thought of Halona, her grandmother's smile a guiding light, urging her to celebrate. The crowd chanted for justice, their voices a song of victory. Chenoa held Daniel's hand, her heart full, though the cost of their fight lingered. The theater buzzed, a new dawn breaking for her people. Chenoa rushed to the hospital, her heart racing as she found Halona, her grandmother's face pale, her breaths faint. Halona smiled weakly, her eyes bright, whispering pride in Chenoa's courage. She gripped Chenoa's hand, her voice a soft blessing, urging her to sing on. Halona's eyes closed, her breath stopping, and Chenoa sobbed, her world shattering. She kissed Halona's forehead, grief flooding her, yet her grandmother's love anchored her. Chenoa whispered a Cheyenne prayer, her voice breaking, vowing to honor Halona's sacrifice. Daniel stood beside her, his presence steady, sharing her pain. Chenoa felt Halona's spirit, a quiet strength, pushing her to carry their legacy forward. The Cheyenne songs rang free, safe from Reed's grasp, as Chenoa returned to her tribe, her voice pure in their ceremonies. She sang for Halona, each note a tribute, earning her people's respect. Daniel stood by her, their love accepted, building a haven for Cheyenne music. Reed and Carter faced prison, their crimes laid bare, the world knowing their theft. Halona's sacrifice burned in Chenoa's heart, her memory a flame of courage. The tribe honored Halona in a quiet ritual, their voices joined in song. Chenoa felt her ancestors' pride, her path clear, carrying a message of resilience. She walked with Daniel, her spirit strong, ready to protect her heritage forever.